I'm your host, Matthew Asbell, and by day, I'm an intellectual property attorney. My guest today is Larry Namer. And Larry's really interesting because, you hear about one chapter of his life where he will tell you about being the co-founder of the Entertainment Network and cable television. But he's lived many chapters, and his chapters are full of exciting and interesting and inspiring stories. And he's even gone and taken that another level by writing a book. So we're gonna talk with Larry and hear about his various chapters. But Larry, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
When we first met, you told me that you kind of see your life in chapters, and it's apropos, right? You've written a book, and your book's got chapters. Those chapters are these different phases of your life. I think the one that people will readily want to know first is probably not your first chapter, though. It's the chapter about how you became the co-founder of Entertainment Networks. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I got into the cable business in the U.S. In New York by default. Got a degree in economics, and I couldn't find a job, so I ended up taking a job with a cable company, splicing cables, thinking it was going to be temporary. But then I kind of grew up a little bit in the business, and I got recruited to come out to California to build the first 61-channel two-way cable system in the country. And, while I'm there, you're a Brooklyn kid, and all your neighbors and stuff are going to the parties and premieres and hanging out with celebrities. And I said, wow, that looks really cool. I want to do that as long as I'm in LA. And when I called the studios, they said, you're kind of like the gas company. You're a utility. No, we're not going to let you come. And so I said to, finally I met somebody from marketing. I think it was at Universal. I don't understand. The most valuable or most efficient marketing vehicle you have for a movie is typically the movie trailer. I said, but the only time I ever see a movie trailer is when I'm already in the movies. I said, wouldn't you want me to see that while I'm in my house to make me want to go to the movies? And they said, yeah, but it's too expensive. I said, okay, tell you what, you give me those trailers, I'll put them on TV, but you put me on those party lists. And he said, sure, if you'll do that. So we did that. And then we did some audience research. What's your favorite channel? They go, oh, I love CNN. I love ESPN. I love that trailer channel. I mean, we didn't even give it a name. And, I just filed it in the back of my head. I said, that's amazing. I get the best 2 minutes of a $50 million movie for free among people's favorite channels. Then the company I worked for was a Canadian company. And they had actually sold out and moved back to Toronto, and they wanted me to go there. And I went, no. I said, I didn't go from New York to LA to go to Toronto. So me and a friend of mine, Alan Marufka, we were just also an East Coast guy. We were just kicking around ideas to keep us in LA. Alan was going, well, I played around with this idea of MTV of the movies. And I went, wait a second. I said, I've been doing this trailer channel, which when you think about it, MTV gets these music videos for free, and they stand a host in front of a green screen and go, and Madonna has a new video. I said, we could get all these movie trailers for free, which are even higher production value, and we could stand a host in front of a green screen and go, and Schwarzenegger has a new movie. So, that was kind of the beginning of the idea, and we thought we were really smart, and we wrote a business plan, and people saying, oh, so it's an interesting idea, but, your people don't start TV networks. Only big media companies could start TV networks. And we weren't smart enough to listen. And 3.5 years later, we finally found a little bit of money. We put the network on the air, and then everybody said, why don't you tell us that's what you want to do? We would have given you that money 3 years ago. An interesting journey, because then the going amount of money you needed to start a TV network back then, a cable network, was low end was 60 million, high end was 100 million. And, we realized that chances of anybody giving us 100 are none, and 60 probably close to none. But then we found a guy on Wall Street who just took over investment banking for what was a bond house. Somebody introduced us, and we went to a meeting, and it was interesting because the guy had movie posters on his wall. And Alan and I just kind of looked at each other and said, that's strange. And the guy said, oh, I used to be the entertainment reporter for my college newspaper. I really love this. I want to do it. And, I said, great. Can you give us more like the 100 million so we could do all the stuff we really have in our head? And he goes, well, no. He goes, I'm only allowed to sign for 2.5. And I was like, well, what am we supposed to do with $2.5 million? I mean, it costs 60 million at least. And he goes, well, that's all I can do. So Alan and I just said, you know what? Nobody's giving us the 60 or 100. So we said, we'll take the 2.5, and we did. And I had a friend who was teaching radio, television, and film at University of Texas in Austin. And I called him up and said, Brian, do you have kids that, need intern jobs for the summer? And he goes, yeah, we have trouble placing a lot of kids this year. So I could send you a few. I said, no, don't send me a few. Send me all you got. And he actually sent us 31 interns. And what people don't realize, because he is now, it's this huge monster. It's one of the biggest global TV networks that ever existed. I think we're in 142 countries now. But what people don't realize is that he really started with only $2.5 million. And we had 11 employees and 31 interns.
You started this out. It wasn't even in your plan. You had your economics degree. You're trying to figure out what to do, and you couldn't get that job and ended up in technical fields. And then through happenstance, essentially, and a little bit of creativity, or I should say a lot of creativity, you arrived at EE and then developed that.
Right out of school, I took what I thought was going to be a temporary job. So I knew someone whose dad was in the electrical workers union. And they said, oh, we just organized this thing called cable TV. I don't really know what it is or whatever, but here's the name of the shop steward. Go see him and say the union sent you. And so I did that, and they gave me a job as an assistant underground splicer. I wasn't even a splicer. I was the assistant underground splicer, $90 a week. And my job was every day to go under the streets of Manhattan and help put the wires together. I caught on to how you do things really quick. I learned the equipment really fast because I read the instruction booklets, and I quickly rose from an assistant splicer to a splicer. And then I became a construction guy, and then a installer and a service guy. So I went up the ranks of the technical side really, really quickly. And it was actually funny because Time Inc. bought the company, when I was there just for a year or two. And the union now had to negotiate against, these guys from Harvard and Yale and stuff like that. And, the shop steward knew I had an economics degree and said, hey, kid, we're going to put you on the negotiating committee because you understand all this number stuff. And I went, yeah, all right. So I ended up on the negotiating committee for really the first labor agreement between the cable industry and an employer, Time Incorporated. Time was more of a publishing company at the time. It was before Time Warner. And so we negotiated a very favorable contract. At the end, the union guy said, hey, you did really good, kid. So at 23, they made me the vice chairman of the cable TV workers. So I was a union official at 23 years old. And literally everybody on the East Coast who was in the cable business was under that agreement and stuff like that. So that was pretty bizarre. But then Time Inc. eventually sent in one of their golden child, their golden boy, a guy named Nicholas, who ended up, after with the Time Warner merger, ended up as the chairman of Time Warner. They sent Nick Nicholas in as the president. And Nick found that it was easy for him to talk to me because, I had the college degree and we could talk about money and budgets and balance sheets and stuff like that. And he kept encouraging, saying, Larry, I want you to move into management. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then finally, he made me the proverbial offer I couldn't refuse. And so at 25, I moved from the union side to management, and I became the director of operations. So all those departments that I worked for, all those technical departments, now reported to me. So at 25, I had like 305 people reporting to me, and it was kind of crazy and stuff like that. And then I remained in that for, a while. And then they bought the biggest cable company in the country then, which is a company called ATC out of Denver. And they wanted to think of how they can maximize the value of the return on investment in all those wires that they put underground. So they made me the director of corporate development, which my responsibility was finding new uses of cable television other than providing entertainment. So this kind of preceded even the internet. But, we were doing telephony and home security and remote medical diagnostics. We're doing all this futuristic stuff, which is really kind of what tweaked my interest in what these wires could actually do, more than just give you MTV or, anything like that. So, um, and then when the big cities all began to franchise cable, they realized that cable TV was more than just good reception. And, they wanted to have all these fancy services. So they would issue franchises. But the caveat was they didn't want the wires to go on telephone poles like the rural systems because it's pretty unsightly. And when you're in a city, they wanted them to go underground. So there was a Canadian company that won the franchise for Los Angeles, the Valley Cable system, which is going to be the biggest and first two-way interactive 61 channel cable system in the country. But they had to put it underground. Well, they needed to get someone to come and run it who knew how to build underground. And I was probably the only person in the country who knew it then. So I got recruited. That's how I got recruited to come out to LA.
So you went out to LA working for the Canadian company, or no, working with the Canadian company, right, on behalf of.
Working for them. They hired me. I was the youngest general manager of a major cable system in the country. I was 31 years old.
You never had a vision of this in your youth, that this would be something you would want to do?
No, my parents were, we come from immigrant stock. Parents, were Turkish descent. And, their aspiration for their children was get a civil service job and have job security and be able to retire at 65. But no aspirations of anything remotely like it.
I found quite interesting is that sort of as you went through these different chapters of your life, you sort of have a memorable cuisine or dish that you associate with that certain time period. Like, what was a dish you associate with your youth in those early years back in Brooklyn?
People don't realize I started, my real passion is cooking. And, I'm pretty good at the TV stuff and the other media stuff, but cooking is what I really love. And I started cooking at 12 because both my parents worked and my choice was learn how to cook or eat, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for dinner every night. So I did that. And then I started reading my mom's cookbooks and learned all that kind of stuff. But in Brooklyn, growing up in that family situation, we were always told Sunday night, you don't go out, it's dinner with the family. And we would always, we would go, one night would be, one Sunday would be a Jewish deli, the other be Chinese food, the other be Italian food, and the other be seafood. The things that I remember, particularly the Italian restaurants. So in the book, what I do is I write the stories that happened during that time, or the anecdotes matched with the recipes. So from the early Brooklyn years, there was a restaurant in Coney Island called Carolina's, which was just one of these great Italian restaurants. So I even put the recipes for the baked clams is in the book.
And is that something that you made or made regularly? I know you remember the restaurant.
Yeah, well, I learned, I learned different styles of cooking, and I realized I got pretty good at it. I would be able to eat something. Even today, I could go to a restaurant and eat something, and I go, "This is good. I'm going to make it at home." And the first time I try it, I'll get close, but I won't get exact. But the second time, I'll nail it. I mean, I could tell what was in it and what the prep was and all that kind of stuff. So I could pretty much duplicate anything that I eat in a restaurant.
Do you feel like you have a very sophisticated palate that you like? Can you differentiate wines or other kind of fine cuisines that you can tell the minor differences between them?
Cuisines, yes. I mean, over the years, literally what I've done over the years is every month I buy a new cookbook. And then I literally cook the book. Sometimes I don't even eat the stuff, but it's just cooking is almost like a form of therapy for me. And, but no, with wine, it's actually, as long as it's not cheap wine. So if it's like a $20 bottle or anything higher, I can't tell the difference between the $20 bottle and the $300 bottle. I mean, it tastes the same to me. If you give me like the $500 bottle, the $5 bottle from Trader Joe's or something, I'll know the difference. But generally not.
But that's pretty interesting, right? If you can go to a restaurant and you can taste all the elements or most of the elements of a particular dish and recreate it after the first or second time, it seems like you must have a pretty sophisticated palate. I know I have a friend and a client who makes extra virgin olive oil or grows olives and produces all extra virgin olive oil in Greece. And she sent me on this 2-day program to learn how to differentiate these olive oils. And you take a test for certification afterwards. I failed miserably. I got like, 60% or something. But I wonder if that's something I mean, wine sounds like no, but have you tried that with olive oil?
For most things, yes. I can. Wine, no. Wine just doesn't work for me. But with the olive oil, it's actually interesting because everybody thinks of Greece and Italy and stuff. But last year, the number one olive oil in the world is actually from Croatia.
They're pretty cool olive oils from different parts of the world you would never expect. I've been to an international olive oil competition where people from all over the world submit, and I got to go representing the clients, so I got to try them. My family, my wife's from Brazil. Brazilians are not known for their olive oil, but there was a Brazilian olive oil producer, and it was quite good. It's pretty interesting. We talked about your early years. We talked about what got you to but I happen to know that you've had a pretty global career. Where'd you go after you finished E, or what made you leave E?
I just always had this revelation in my head, and and being in the Hollywood world, that Hollywood was becoming more of a measure of creativity, a measure of quality, but less and less a geographic place. When you think about the industry of video entertainment or visual entertainment, you go back to the early days of film, you needed these giant sound stages, you needed very expensive cameras and lighting and all that stuff. So people around the world had to come to Hollywood where those facilities existed. But as technology kept making it cheaper and cheaper, I mean, when we started a film camera, a studio camera, was running like $250,000, and quite honestly, it's not as good as what's on my iPhone. So I realized that as technology kept making it cheaper and cheaper to make visual entertainment or video entertainment, that it would change the thing dramatically. So we went out and we realized that we were one of the few categories. We were all about celebrities and media and entertainment, and Hollywood with quotes around it was still well known around the world. We said we actually are in one of the very few genres that travels literally to any country in the world. I mean, like if you started the Weather Channel, who cares, if somebody's in London, what do they care about the weather in the US or New York or anything? Well, we said when you get to celebrities and movies and all that kind of stuff, you could literally go anywhere. So we set out to really develop the international market. We were the fastest growing cable network in the world. First year, we were in 14 different countries. Now I think the number was up around 142 countries and stuff. And so it really started giving me a global view. And my thing was, we hired someone to kind of run the day-to-day of E in the U.S., and I really spent a bunch of time thinking about international growth and technology growth and things like that. So I just became enamored with understanding other markets and what the differences were in audience tastes and delivery methods and stuff like that. So when I finally decided to leave E entirely, I mean, I stayed on the board and stuff, but then a friend of mine who's a lawyer had some clients that were somebody proposed a deal in what was then the Soviet Union and said, "Hey, Larry, would you go over? It's an entertainment, it's a media related deal. Would you go and take a look at it and tell me if it's real?" And I was like, "Go to the Soviet Union? Yeah, that's an adventure. I'll do that." And I went there, and of course the deal was total BS and nothing. But I kind of fell in love with the place and said, you know what? It's so clear to me that things are changing now and that there'll be huge, huge opportunities in the media world there. So we started a little media company there, and we were doing TV, film, live events. We were doing big music festivals and things like that. So got deeply involved in Russia and in the former Soviet Union. Had the number one TV show there for 10 years. soap opera because we figured they get enough bad news. They need something to lighten up their day. And then we helped start this big music festival called the White Nights Festival, which was the festival held every year, June 16th to June 21st, where we would raise enough money to support the Children's Hospital and the orphanage in St. Petersburg, basically covered their annual budget in 6 days. And so doing that, that's when I got involved a lot with music and to get people to play at the festival, we literally had to beg, Western stars to come there. And then, when the market really opened up, all the agencies were going, oh, Larry, you got to help us get into the market with whatever the music group was. And they said, well, I don't really do that. And they go, oh, when you needed them for your music festival, you did that. But so we ended up starting a music company there, and we did, over 300 concerts of major Western stars, from Ringo Starr to David Bowie to, and then everything in between, Jose Feliciano, Julio Iglesias. So, we really diversified there. And then, we got further and further into the market. We started bringing live events there, like Disney on Ice and the Harlem Globetrotters and things like that. So that's kind of how I really got involved in everything, beyond just the video part of making entertainment product.
I mean, you downplay a lot of your experience. I think I have to force you to back up a little bit, because I don't think it would be so easy if I decided I wanted to go to Russia, whether it was now or decades ago. Hey, I want to go to Russia, and hey, I'm going to start something. I'm going to start a soap opera. How did you get a soap opera on television in Russia? And how did you build popularity? Because one thing I know about you is that you have a sense of cultural competency, recognizing the differences between how people perceive things in different cultures. And I know you'll talk about that a little bit, but you must have done something beyond, hey, I went to Russia, saw this deal was bad. To get from there, I'm going to produce a soap opera and it's going to be very popular. How did that happen?
It was really hard times there when the Soviet Union collapsed. The economic times were horrible. There were food shortages. People lined up outside, stores for hours to get a piece of chicken. So, we just said we need to give them something so that when they come home at night, they could have their dinner, sit on the couch, and just kind of get lost in fantasy land. And we said there's no better form than soap operas for doing that, because soap operas, you can make up any stories that you want to dream about. So we said we got to give them something to, just take their mind off of the bad news. I mean, so that's how we got involved in this soap opera world. But then when the mayor of St. Petersburg came to us and said, you got to help me start this music festival because these kids are starving and dying. And, we did that. We said, okay, we don't really know music, but yeah, we probably do know more than you do. So we helped start this White Nights Festival. And, probably the most interesting story that comes out of that, which people still look at me weirdly when I tell them, David Bowie, I was telling David, David, you got to come and play. And he's like, no, I'm not doing it. And I'm going like, why? He goes, well, I really don't like Russian people. I don't like Russian food. I'm trying not to drink. It's too cold there. And I don't want to travel for, all that way to go play another concert hall. David, there's a fort in St. Petersburg where all the czars are buried, the rulers of Russia for the last 500 years. I said, what if I could build a stage over the graves of the czars and I'll let you dance on their graves? And he said, if you could do that, then yes, I'll do it. And, I went back and told the mayor, I said, listen, I had to promise Bowie that he could dance on the graves of the czars. And the mayor was like, yeah, whatever you need, don't worry. Just go tell the vice mayor I said it's okay. Well, the vice mayor was a guy named Vladimir Putin. So, we worked pretty closely. And, we I know all the stuff going on in the world, but we had a great relationship. We were helping the kids in the city that he grew up in, and we weren't there to make a quick dollar and run away. So we were always fine. And then when he ended up in the Kremlin, his minister of communications had to rewrite regulatory policy to make the media world look a little bit familiar to Western marketers, because if they're going to move into a consumer-based economy as opposed to a state-mandated economy, Western people don't want to buy typically Western luxury goods, the Gucci's and the Pradas and, all of that stuff. and Western market is going to come in and they're going to look for media that looks a little bit familiar to them. So the Minister of Communications, I work with him and we kind of help rewrite regulatory policy for Russia, which is real simple. Ads are 30 seconds, 60 seconds. They're not whatever you feel like today kind of thing, because in the Soviet days, it was pretty lackadaisical. It was, if you knew the right guy in the party, you did whatever you wanted. And so we did that for them. And we had and then we started bringing live events in, and we brought, like I say, the Harlem Globetrotters and Disney on Ice, and then loads of concerts, like over 300 concerts. So I did that. And then the Chinese, some years later, decided that they also needed to do media reform, because if they were going to move into a more consumer economy, they needed to make, things look familiar. So they liked the Russian model. They went to the Russians, and the Russians said, "Oh, no, you got to call this guy in L.A. who did it for us." And so I actually got called in by the Chinese government. So we did that. And again, very simple stuff. I mean, not rocket science. And but I, having grown up on loving Chinese food, I'm saying, oh my God, what an opportunity this is for me. So we did that. And then they said, "Can you help teach young TV executives?" And this is with quotes around it, "Could you teach them the process of creativity for profit?" And I said, that's a bizarre enough subject that, yeah, I could do that. And again, very simple. Like, here's how you formulate ideas. Here's how you develop them. Here's how you test them. Here's how you, that kind of stuff. So we did that. And, and then the guys that we work with, were typically guys who were educated in the West. They went to the Harvards and the Stanfords and stuff. So they're back in China, and they're not the heavy duty doctrine guys. They believe in the cause, but they're not the old guard doctrine guys. And they said, "Well, why don't you start a little media company here so we could learn from you?" And I went, "Well, because you don't let Western media companies in here." And they went, "Well, we don't let the ones we don't like." I go, "Okay, great. Why are you going to be so nice to me?" And they said, "It's really simple. When we have a fight with Rupert Murdoch, it's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. When we have a fight with you, we go out for drinks, we scream and yell for one night, but the next day we're okay." They said, "For now, that's the way we'd rather do it." I said, "Okay, that's pretty honest." So we set up this media company there, and they set us up to be an experimental company, because legally you can't exist as a Western media company. And we've been an experiment there for now 15 years. It just shows when the Chinese want you there, they make it easy. When they don't want you there, they make it impossible. And yeah, we're pretty broad-based. We do TV, film, internet content. We do a lot of immersive entertainment, and, we're doing all kinds of different things there and stuff. And and it's been good. It's been fine.
Is there a chapter in your book about Russia and a chapter in your book about China? Is that how it works?
Yeah, one of the things, with Russia that I think people are most fascinated with was, back in the early days, you kind of had the politicians emerging, but then you had basically the mafia. It was the Wild West. The soap opera was so popular that all these mafia guys were, they all had girlfriends that were big fans of the show. And they would see me in a restaurant and they'd come over and go, "Well, tell us what happens to blah, blah, blah character next week so I could be a hero with my girlfriend." And I'm like, "Well, I can't do that." And they go, "Well, do you like tomatoes?" And I go, "Yeah, I love them, but you can't get them here for the last few months." They go, "Tell us what happens next week and you'll have tomatoes delivered to your door tomorrow." That's how we established our relationship with the mafia guys and stuff. And then, one day it was like the craziest story. I land in St. Petersburg, and back then the planes didn't come up to the terminals. They parked out on the runway, and then a bus would come and take you to the terminal. So the plane lands, and I'm coming down the thing, and I see these guys, while we were taxiing, I see cars driving on the side of us, which I thought was kind of weird. And then I'm coming down the thing, and I see these guys with like twisted ears and twisted noses and Armani suits with bulges in their pants. And I'm going, "Oh my God, what the hell is this?" And, when I come down, they go, "Are you Larry Namer?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they go, "Well, you got to come with us." I go, "For what?" They go, "Sasha Big needs to see you tonight." And this is like the head. I mean, the toughest guy, craziest guy. And I go, like, what does he want? They go, just, come with us. I go, well, I got to go through passport control and all of that. They said, just get in the car. I go, oh my God, they know I'm having dinner with the mayor. They're going to give me I'm thinking of The Godfather, they're going to tell me where the gun is planted and I got to kill the mayor and stuff like that. But anyway, we get to the building, where passport control is, and literally the line is 2 hours long, and they would just walk me up to the front, and they look at the guy and go, he's with us. And they just walk through. And I'm like, that's kind of interesting. Anyway, so they said, okay, at 8:00, Sasha needs to see you, be in front of the Europa Hotel. I do that, and the 8:00 comes, and I'm nervous as hell. I'm going, I can't imagine why this guy wants to see me. I said, it can't be good. I mean, somebody who works for me insulted him. They're going to tell me I got to kill the guy, or we'll kill you, or I can't even dream of what he wants. So the 8:00 comes, the cars pull up, and the guys with the twisted noses and ears, get out. And he gets out, and he's a big guy, and he's literally just kind of takes me with his arm and goes, we need to talk. And, I speak a little Russian. He speaks a little English, and plus he had a translator there. We go into the hotel and we sit down. He goes, I need you to do me a favor, and I'm very embarrassed to ask you. I said, Sasha, what do you need? Whatever you want. It's you. Meanwhile, my legs are crumbling. It's really, it's so embarrassing. But if you could do me this favor, I said, Sasha, whatever you need, just tell me. He goes, my mother is a big fan of the show. And we heard that one of the main characters are coming here to be in your concert tomorrow night. Is there any way you could introduce my mother? I went, really? That's it? I go, yeah, I could do that. I said, just 8:00 tomorrow, be it backstage at the concert hall, and, bring mom. And so, 8:00 comes and the back door leads to the VIP waiting room, and, we have food and all that stuff. We would hire like off-duty special forces, the Russian equivalent of Navy SEALs, and they would be our security for these concert events. And, these are like tough guys. And they see him come walking in. They were like, uh-oh, we're out of here. And they literally, all my security leaves. And I'm like, where are you going? They go, no way that we're staying in the room with this guy. Anyway, the actor was Lane Davies, who was from the show. I told Lane, I said, Lane, I'm going to introduce you to a woman tomorrow. I don't care, who she is or what she looks like. She's the prettiest woman you've ever seen in your life. I said, you kiss her on the cheek, you get the photographer, you take pictures with her, you just smile for as long as she's in the room. And he's like, Larry, what's wrong with you? I go, you really don't want to know. Just do what I say. Anyway, so, he brings mom in, and he's standing in the back. I bring mom over to Lane, and she's like going, on behalf of the children of St. Petersburg, you've made our lives so happy. It ends up she's the vice principal of a school. The guy is like standing in the back of the room with his arms crossed, with he's got scars on his face, and he's just standing there looking, no facial expressions whatsoever. Anyway, Lane gets the pictures done, and the whatever, and the mom is like thrilled, and he kisses her on the cheek, and so then I walk her back to him, and I go, I hope that was okay. And he just looks at me, he goes, you made my mother very happy. I never forget. And literally, he never forgot. He sent around like crews to every restaurant and nightclub in St. Petersburg and said, with my picture, and saying, this is a friend of Sasha. We don't care if he's drunk at 3:00 in the morning and he wants to go home with your wife. You get him a taxi cab. If they as much as hit a bump, you're going to have to answer for it. So literally, it was an unbelievable story. And, so that was one of the more adventurous stories about my Russian time.
I don't know if you recall, but is the recipe that you have for the Russian chapter twisted tomato something?
No, I think we did beef stroganoff, which was one of my favorites.
And what about for China?
It was actually interesting in China because when I was in college, I ended up getting a job in Brooklyn delivering food for a Chinese restaurant. In New York, everybody does takeout, and particularly on the weekends. Obviously, before Uber Eats and all of those things, you go in the kitchen, you pick up the bags, you bring them to people's houses. But I was always so fascinated with cooking, I would always ask the chefs, teach me how to do this and teach me how to do that. And they just thought it was the funniest thing, teaching a Caucasian kid how to cook Chinese, and I got pretty good at it. And I love Chinese food. So they were doing a New Year's party, Chinese New Year party. It was like a February. And in New York, there was a snowstorm that day, and three of the chefs didn't make it to work because the subways were closed. And the head chef just looked at me and said, "Hey, you know how to do this. You gotta cook." And I went, "Yeah, all right, I'll do that." So I ended up cooking in a Chinese restaurant for 2 years and stuff, which is again kind of wild. But then when I started going to China, they go, "Oh, let us show you how to use the chopsticks." And I'm going, "No, I can show you how to use chopsticks. Not only do you not don't have to explain it," I said, "but I could cook that." And they were just fascinated with it to the point where I ended up with Beijing TV, which is one of the biggest TV companies in China, ended up doing a 4-part series of me cooking. So I had a cooking show in China cooking Chinese food, which was loosely titled The White Boy Cooks Chinese Food.
I was a waiter at a Chinese restaurant in college, and I would find when it was the meal time for the waiters was like the best time. Like, I mean, I would learn these words about the different dishes. I didn't get to cook like you did, but I would learn these words about the different dishes or how do you say takeout, why mai, I think something like that. The dinner for the waiters was always something I never knew, never saw before. It was something like it was never anything on the menu. It was something completely different. Back in those days, like it was hunks of raw tuna like you see today at a gas station, but then it was not anything you would ever see in the US.
In China, they have these night markets and stuff, which, if you're single, you'd take your dates there after, whatever you did. And you would get like lotus on a stick, all kinds of very strange stuff. Tasted good if you didn't know what it was.
You've told us about your early days in the union and your cable technology, technical work, your how that transitions to negotiations and business. You told us about E and the development of E, and then all this amazing stuff, the TV networks, the concerts and music festivals and things in Russia and China. I mean, you are not someone who could say that you've had more than one life for sure. You've got more life. So what's next for you?
I've always loved how you could blend technology into not just the creative side of the business, but the business side of the media business. And I've been a real proponent. I mean, way back when I was in between gigs, I was actually the primary consultant to Bill Gates' Microsoft for interactive TV strategy. So I got to learn a lot more about technology than I think any human should. But I'm fascinated with new technology, particularly AI. I mean, I'm probably one of the only folks in Hollywood that is not fearing it, but just welcoming it. Going, oh my God, this is such a godsend. For me, it was like before, if you'd write a script to have to do a budget, you work on a typewriter and, you'd have to use whiteout if you made a mistake and it was such tedious, whatever. I just love how AI can simplify like mundane tasks and stuff. And I use it as a tool. And I speak a lot these days on the pros and cons of AI. I mean, because there are some great things that it's going to be able to do for us, but there's also this downside that if we don't make sure that our laws and regulations and mentality catch up, the reality of the fact that it's coming whether you like it or not. I mean, to me, the great example was, when digital music started, the music industry said, we're never going to let this happen. And they spent 10 years fighting digital music. And, now they bitch and moan. They go, oh, my iTunes and Spotify have become, these big monsters and stuff. I go, yeah, it's because you went to sleep for 10 years and you let them. You could have been that. I don't want to see the visual entertainment business go the same way. Technology marches on whether you like it or not. We need a body of law. We need regulations that basically put up deterrents for bad people who want to do bad things. I mean, because right now you can do whatever you want. There's really no specific laws that stop you. I mean, it's beginning to catch up a little, but you look at the positive side. And I give people this example. Like if you were to say to me, Larry, could you write a treatment for a TV series that deals with coffee cups or, whatever the subject is. I mean, it used to take me by the time I did the research and did formulated the creative ideas and the PowerPoint and, all the business kind of things, it would take me 5 days. I said, now, using AI, it literally takes me 30 seconds. And it's never right. It's never 100%. It's always 80%. It still needs my touch. And but I spend an hour editing. I'm now getting done in literally 1 hour, what used to take me 5 days. I said, if I could get paid the same amount for delivering that product that only took me an hour, I said, now I could either do more of it and make more money, or I could reclaim that time into the rest of my life. I mean, now I've got a little grandkid. I could play with the grandkid. I could learn to speak Spanish. I could go on a cruise. As people, the most valuable thing we have is our time. I mean, because we're all getting out of here at relatively the same amount of time on the planet. So I said, how can you not love that? Now, again, there's got to be things that tell bad people that if you do something bad, there's going to be, there's going to be problems for you there. And there's a downside to doing it, but we're not going to stop it from happening. So we better learn to embrace it, not be like the music business was 10 years later going, boy, look at all that happened while we were fighting it.
Yeah, I mean, there are the bad actors, and they're the people who try to capitalize on technology or capitalize in a negative way, right? Take advantage of or exploit the problems with, from my side, right, from law as it relates to these new technologies, are not so much them as throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right? All the incidental things or things that impact an individual's rights or a company's rights because of the way the technology is. The music industry, there were people who were nefarious, but there mostly were people who just wanted to find a way to get a song that they wanted to listen to, right? The law is always really slow to catch up on that stuff. We don't deal with the technological developments very well and know how to find the balance that is fair to the various parties and stakeholders, at least in my view.
I'm kidding. It will catch up. You could already start to see, things happening now. And there's also laws in place that are already in place that weren't meant for AI, but still, I can't make a movie with Tom Cruise and pay him and then take the outtakes and make another movie with it. I mean, he'll sue me and, and it'll get stopped. The same thing with AI. And people go, well, you're going to put people in more movies that they didn't agree to. I'm going, you can't do that because I'll go to jail or I'll get sued or I'll pay fines. And I mean, so there are things that are already in existence that are deterrents that need to be applied.
Yes, I mean, and those things we use every day, but usually they don't perfectly fit the situation. So it's tweaking them, and that's it's a dynamic thing. Over time, it changes as different situations are encountered. But I agree with you. You have to embrace it. It's the technology. It's here. It's not going away. So how do we use it safely and effectively and efficiently? And how do we avoid, you know, taking advantage of what someone else's income would have been? You have these authors who don't want their style imitated in someone else's book, right? That there's aspects of that you can understand, and you try to figure out where the balance is, right?
But, you look at the positive. I mean, my book is a good example because people were amazed. I mean, people have been after me to write the book for 20 years, and I've always just refused to do it because I'm not ready to write the last chapter. But then, with my daughter having the baby, I said, okay, for the grandbaby, I'd rather him learn about grandpa from me than learn about from my kids. We wrote the book, and I've never written a book before, and I'm probably never going to write another one. My book hit the bestseller list in 4 days. And people going, Larry, how did that happen? It's like crazy. Well, the way it happened was I used AI and I built the entire marketing plan based on AI because I never marketed the book. And literally I followed the plan perfectly. And 4 days later, we were a bestseller and people were just amazed by it. So, there's a great example. Instead of spending years or months trying to learn how to market a book, literally did it in half an hour.
That's awesome. Well, I think that's our time for today. My guest has been Larry Namer, the co-founder of Entertainment Networks, but so much more, and the author of Offscript, which has some amazingly fascinating stories, in case you haven't been paying attention for the past hour, as well as some great recipes, and I, for one, will enjoy it. Larry, it's been great to have you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this with me, and I look forward to seeing you again.